por el momento demográfico en el cual nos encontramos. En los próximos 30 años, el número de personas mayores de 60 años se duplicará, poniendo una presión creciente sobre nuestros sistemas de pensiones, salud y protección social. Las perspectivas de desarrollo sostenible están en juego. Necesitamos definir, en muchos casos, un nuevo contrato intergeneracional y social para planificar y responder efectivamente al cambio demográfico. A esto se suman desafíos persistentes, deudas pendientes, eh, la profunda desigualdad social, la alta vulnerabilidad al cambio climático, complejos flujos migratorios y, por supuesto, fenómenos de conflictividad social, inestabilidad política. Pero hay una característica estructural que nos acompaña desafortunadamente por décadas, si no siglos, y es la inaceptable eh, situación de que esta región sea una de las más desiguales del planeta. Si bien hemos logrado reducir la pobreza en términos absolutos, nuestros avances en la lucha contra la desigualdad han sido insuficientes para cerrar brechas. El año pasado, en la quinta reunión de la conferencia en Cartagena, Colombia, los Estados miembros presentes en aquella oportunidad reafirmaron el compromiso con el consenso de Montevideo y reconocieron las múltiples e interrelacionadas formas de la desigualdad. En ese contexto, se hizo un llamamiento unánime de parte de los Estados miembros para seguir ayudando acompañando e identificando políticas e inversiones estratégicas que impulsen a los países hacia la sostenibilidad y la prosperidad. Pero persistentes y marcadas desigualdades realmente requieren un enfoque transformador, centrado, como decía, en las personas y sus trayectorias a lo largo del ciclo de vida. La diversidad demográfica que caracteriza a esta región es un desafío para los convencionales, ya que las sociedades se componen de individuos con diferentes circunstancias, que influye en el acceso a servicios, la participación social y el ejercicio de los derechos humanos. Es por tanto crucial invertir adecuadamente en cada etapa del ciclo de vida, buscando esas soluciones que garanticen igualdad de oportunidades en función de necesidades reales que las poblaciones enfrentan. Permítame ilustrar por qué identificar y visibilizar a quienes enfrentan mayores exclusiones es tan importante, poniendo el foco en una de las mayores deudas históricas de nuestro continente, la inclusión de las personas con discapacidad. Y como ya se ha mencionado, la creación del Grupo de Amigos de las Personas con Discapacidad o Grupo de Cartagena, por iniciativa de Colombia, no es un acto simbólico, es un mandato urgente para incluir plenamente a estas personas en el seguimiento del consenso de Montevideo. La realidad es cruda y nos interpela día a día. Solo 17 de cada 100 jóvenes con discapacidad llegan a la educación superior frente a 24 de sus pares sin discapacidad. Las barreras son múltiples. ¿Cómo llegar a centros educativos cuando las aceras de las calles son inaccesibles? En la región, solo 1 de cada 3 autobuses tiene rampas, lo que obliga a las personas usuarias de sillas de ruedas, por ejemplo, a arriesgar su integridad física en las calles. Este es un sistema que niega derechos y como consecuencia las tasas de desempleo de las personas con discapacidad son hasta el doble de las personas sin discapacidad. Las mujeres y niñas con discapacidad pueden tener hasta 10 veces mayor riesgo de sufrir violencia de género o sexual. La falta de armonización legislativa en muchos países mantiene vigente la figura de la curatela, que priva la capacidad jurídica, en especial a personas con discapacidad mental o intelectual, impidiéndoles votar, firmar contratos o ejercer su derecho a formar una familia. Esta negación de derechos ha llevado incluso a la persistencia de prácticas inaceptables como la esterilización forzada. Estas situaciones nos recuerdan el cambio de paradigmas de la Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad. La discapacidad no está en la persona, sino en las barreras que impone el entorno. Y hablando de entornos, un entorno, nuestros entornos, deben adaptarse a los cambios, a las necesidades de las personas, responder a la diversidad, con un enfoque interseccional, de género, para proporcionar soluciones integrales y sistémicas. Y hablando de sistemas, muy especialmente debemos transformar nuestros entornos para convertirlos en sociedades del cuidado. Recordando que hoy, precisamente, es el Día Internacional de los Cuidados y el Apoyo. Esta coincidencia con este día nos obliga a la reflexión. ¿Quiénes son? ¿Dónde están aquellas personas que cuidan y aquellas personas que precisan ser cuidadas? Y en este sentido, en la región, 1 de cada 5 niñas se casa o se une antes de los 18 años, enfrentando diversas formas de violencia y una carga desproporcionada de trabajo de cuidados. Las mujeres dedican alrededor de 20 horas semanales adicionales al trabajo no remunerado en comparación con los hombres. Pero fortalecer todos estos sistemas necesita de todos nosotros trascender la visión de una política social como meros gastos públicos o incluso herramientas de clientelismo político, y reconocer a la política social como una inversión estratégica del desarrollo, como una política inteligente con réditos económicos. Por ejemplo, un reciente estudio de UNFPA estableció que el impacto socioeconómico del embarazo adolescente y la maternidad temprana en esta región cuesta a la región aproximadamente 15.300 millones de dólares, equivalentes más o menos a 1% del PIB en algunos países. Sin embargo, en contrapartida, invertir en la prevención y reducción del embarazo adolescente implica un rédito por cada dólar invertido de 15 a 40 dólares. Es decir, estamos hablando no solamente de una acción de caridad, sino de una inversión que da réditos. Entonces, desde UNFPA queremos reiterar nuestro compromiso con la ruta, la hoja de ruta que establece el Consenso de Montevideo y especialmente comprometernos a la producción y utilización de inteligencia demográfica que nos permita comprender mejor las realidades que viven las personas. Hoy hemos compartido el análisis de la situación poblacional de América Latina y el Caribe, que analiza 13 países de nuestra región y que se ofrece como una herramienta de políticas públicas y decisiones. En segundo lugar, nos comprometemos a acompañar a los países en el impulso de reformas que garanticen la plena capacidad jurídica y el derecho a decidir sobre su cuerpo, salud y vida para todas las personas. En tercer lugar, nos comprometemos a seguir trabajando codo a codo con los países para asegurar el acceso a servicios de salud sexual y reproductiva para todas las personas sin discriminación. Y, por último, pero no menos importante, nos comprometemos a seguir trabajando conjuntamente con las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, organizaciones sociales, incluidas muy especialmente las organizaciones de las personas con discapacidad, cuya participación activa es una condición sine qua non para el diseño de políticas públicas que además trasciendan los ciclos electorales de los países. Estimados delegados, estimadas delegadas, les invito a continuar con el trabajo de llevar al centro de nuestra estrategia de implementación del Consenso de Montevideo los derechos de todas las personas y en este caso de las personas con discapacidad en particular. Necesitamos sociedades más justas, resilientes y prósperas, y sin inclusión social amplia esto no será posible. Agradecemos la Presidencia de Colombia que nos ha impulsado a poner este foco muy específico y amplificar las voces de las personas con discapacidad, y agradecemos también la alianza y el el apoyo
partnership, the
mutuo de la
alliance, and
CEPAL con el
mutual
Fondo de
support
Población
of
y, por
ECLAC with
supuesto,
the
a las
Population
organizaciones de la
Fund,
sociedad
and
civil
also
y a
all the
los
civil
representantes de nuestros
society
clientes
organizations
y a
and
los aliados principales
representatives and
como son los
allies
Estados miembros.
like member
Muchas
states.
gracias.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Susana Sotoli, directora regional del UNFPA. Y a continuación me es grato ofrecer la palabra
Thank you.
a Mauricio
Now,
Jaramillo Jacir, el viceministro de Asuntos
I offer the floor
Multilaterales
to
del
the
Ministerio
Vice
de Relaciones
Minister
Exteriores de
of
Colombia
Cultural Affairs of the
como
Ministry
presidencia de esta
of Foreign
conferencia
Affairs
regional.
of Colombia as president of this
Muchas gracias, estimado
table.
Javier Medina Vázquez, secretario ejecutivo adjunto de la Comisión Económica para América Latina y el Caribe. Estimada Susana Sotoli, directora regional del Fondo de Población de Naciones Unidas para América Latina y el Caribe. Estimados ministras y ministros, delegadas y delegados, representantes del Sistema de Naciones Unidas y de la CEPAL, amigas y amigos de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil y el resto de presentes, les damos la bienvenida a la sexta reunión de la mesa directiva de la Conferencia Regional sobre Población y Desarrollo, que tenemos el enorme placer de celebrar acá en la sede de la CEPAL en Santiago de Chile. Para Colombia es un honor estar aquí, además porque tuvimos la oportunidad de celebrar la quinta reunión de la Conferencia Regional en la ciudad de Cartagena. Bueno, siempre insistimos en todos los escenarios multilaterales desde el gobierno de Colombia, y este no puede ser distinto, acerca de el momento particular que se vive en el mundo, por algunas de las cosas que ya mencionó Susana y también Javier. En primer lugar, pues un cambio en la matriz demográfica que hemos visto en otros estados de otras latitudes, especialmente en Europa y en algunos estados del noreste asiático, pero que pensábamos que no iba a aparecer en América Latina, y tiene que ver con el envejecimiento de la población. Hay un reto importante en la materia de población y desarrollo. Hay un reto importante por lo que significa en América Latina toda la adaptación de la economía a los enfoques diferenciados, y que además tiene que darse en consonancia con el cambio climático. El cambio climático nos obliga a un cambio en la matriz productiva, y esto ocurre además en momentos en que desafortunadamente en América Latina campean los discursos que ponen en entredicho la existencia del cambio climático. Avanzan los discursos que pensábamos nunca iba a ocurrir en América Latina, que además ponen también en entredicho la ampliación del catálogo de los derechos humanos, que abogan, por ejemplo, por la aniquilación de conceptos como la igualdad de género, el desarrollo sostenible, la toma de decisiones en materia de política pública basada en la ciencia, basada en los datos, basada en la evidencia empírica, y el reemplazo por una toma de decisiones basada en la moral, en los prejuicios y en presunciones que no tienen ningún fundamento científico, y que además niegan en algunos casos trayectorias culturales de nuestros pueblos. Creo que la presidencia de Colombia de la Mesa Directiva de Población y Desarrollo ha tratado siempre de devolverle a la multilateralidad del campo más bien el vector racional, una toma de decisiones que se debe hacer con base en datos y en información. Y por eso hemos insistido en que los organismos multilaterales, sigan defendiendo los derechos humanos desde una óptica de la interdependencia, entendiendo la imprescriptibilidad, y obviamente que no pueden estar sometidos a ningún o condicionados a ningún discurso político basado en el odio. Este consenso o esta postura se ha manifestado por lo menos en dos grandes activos de nuestra política exterior, que son los ODS y, por supuesto, el consenso de Montevideo, muy importante para la misionalidad de la CEPAL. Colombia ha sido uno de los estados más comprometidos de la región en todo lo que tiene que ver con la reivindicación de los derechos de las personas que presenten alguna discapacidad. Aquí, de hecho, en la mesa directiva está nuestra querida Patricia
We
Sarmiento,
have
encargada del
Patricia
gobierno colombiano
Sarmiento here,
del
who
tema.
is
Participamos además
in
de
charge of this area
la
in our
cumbre
government.
sobre
We
inclusión y
also
discapacidad de
participated in
Berlín
the
en mayo del año
summit
pasado,
in
donde
Berlin
adherimos
last year
plenamente a esta
on
idea de no
integration, where
menos
we
del
adhered
15% para el 15%
to
de la
not
población, y
less than
realmente
15% for
nos sentimos muy
15%
identificados
of the
con eso, que debe ser
population, and we
más que un
feel very
eslogan
much
de
identified with that, which is
nada
not
sobre
only a
nosotros sin
slogan,
nosotros, y que tiene que ver con esta
nothing
idea de que
about us
sean
without us.
las personas con algún tipo de
So
discapacidad las que
persons with
participen
some kind
directamente
of
del
disability should
proceso de
be the
toma de
ones
decisiones y evitemos
who
cualquier
participate
amenaza
in
de
decision
ventriloquismo.
making.
Hemos además trabajado en un
We have
marco
also
conceptual para el
worked on a
desarrollo
conceptual
sostenible en nuestra
framework for
región,
sustainable
en
development in
consonancia
our
con lo que
region,
acabo
in
de decir. Por
agreement with
eso,
what I have just
la
said.
Secretaría Técnica
This is
presentará
why the
el
Technical
documento Las
Secretariat
personas con
will be
discapacidad de la
presenting the
visibilidad
document
estadística al ejercicio de derechos,
Persons
elaborado
with
por la CELA de División Poblacional de la
Disability
CEPAL con apoyo de UNFPA, a quien
with the
también agradecemos
support
todo
of
el trabajo que ha hecho en Colombia.
Persons with Disability from
Antes de
Statistical
finalizar, deseo
Disability to the
expresar nuestro
Exercise of
agradecimiento
Rights.
a la
I would
CEPAL,
like
querido
to
Javier, por
express
todo
our thanks to
su apoyo,
ECLAC, to
acompañamiento a las
Javier
actividades de
for
la presidencia de la mesa
accompanying
directiva, desde su rol de
the
Secretaría Técnica
work
de la
of
conferencia
the
regional.
presiding offices of the
Un
regional
sello distintivo
conference.
además de nuestra conferencia es
This
la
is
activa
something
participación de las
very
organizaciones
characteristic,
de la
which is the
sociedad
active
civil.
participation of
Lo
civil
dijimos
society
también hace un rato en un
organizations. We
evento
mentioned that
paralelo.
in a
Nos
parallel
hemos
event, in
preguntado
a
mucho,
side
quienes
event,
creemos en el
we have
desarrollo
wondered,
sostenible, quienes creemos en los
those of us
derechos
who
humanos y en la
believe in human
multilateralidad, cómo
rights and
hacer
sustainable
que
development and
esto
multilaterality, how
que
to
ventilamos acá, que
turn
estas
what,
banderas que agitamos acá no cambien
how
con los ciclos
can
ideológicos. Y creo
we
que una de
make
las
things remain
em,
independently from
mejores
political
estrategias
cycles.
para que esto
One of the main
sobreviva tiene que ver
strategies
con
for
una
this to
apropiación por parte de
survive
la sociedad civil. Por
is
eso,
to have the
enhorabuena
participation of the
que
civil
haya
society. So
presencia
we're
de la
very
sociedad
glad to
civil, y
have the
desde Colombia
presence of the
siempre
civil
trabajamos de la
society.
mano
And from
con
Colombia, we always
en
work
aras más
hand in
bien
hand
de que estos temas se manejen desde la gobernanza, que no sean
with
monopolio
them
exclusivo
so that this is
de los
not the
gobiernos.
monopoly of the
Quisiera
governments
cerrar diciendo
only.
que
I would like
ratificamos
to
el firme
conclude by
compromiso
saying
de nuestro
that we
gobierno con la
ratify the
implementación del
commitment
Consenso
of
de
our
Montevideo,
government with the
con la
implementation
Agenda
of the
2030 para el
Consensus of
Desarrollo Sostenible,
Montevideo and the 2030
convencidas y
Agenda for Sustainable
convencidos de que es
Development.
necesaria una
We are
profundización del camino
convinced that we
recorrido
need
por
a
la región para seguir
deepening of
promoviendo e
the path that
impulsando
we have
este
followed
instrumento
to
tan
continue
potente y
to
necesario
promote this powerful
que
instrument,
supimos
that so
darnos en
necessary
2013 en la
instrument
capital de
from
Uruguay. Muchas gracias a
2013.
todas y a
Thank you
todos.
very much to you all.
Agradecemos las palabras del viceministro
Thank you
Jaramillo
very much,
en
Mauricio
nombre de
Jaramillo,
la
Vice
presidencia
Minister for
de Colombia de
Multilateral
esta
Affairs of
conferencia
the Ministry of
regional.
Foreign Affairs
Antes
of
de
Colombia.
finalizar esta
In your
inauguración, quería
capacity as
mencionar
chair of the presiding
que
officers of the regional
en
conference
sus
on population and
lugares han
development in
recibido
Latin
copia
America and
del
the Caribbean.
proyecto de acuerdos para esta
You have
reunión.
received a copy of the
Cualquier
draft
duda,
agreement for
tanto el
this
CELADE
meeting.
como la Secretaría estamos a
Any questions that
disposición
you might
para
have,
conversar con las
CELADE and the
delegaciones.
Secretariat are
De
available
esta
to
forma
discuss
damos
with you.
por
So
clausurada
this
nuestra
concludes
inauguración
the
y paso
opening
la
of the
palabra
sixth
a la
meeting of the
presidencia.
presiding
Presidente.
officers of the Regional Conference on Population and Development in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I now give the floor to the chair.
Entonces vamos a proceder a la
So
aprobación
now
del
we have
temario
the
provisional que sometemos a su
approval of
consideración. Si
the
alguien tiene alguna
agenda.
objeción,
If you have of the
si no,
provisional agenda, if you have
queda
objections,
aprobado.
otherwise it is
Eh,
approved.
Bueno, corresponde ahora la
Well,
presentación del documento de las
now we are
personas con
going
discapacidad que tienen, creo que cada una y
to
cada uno de ustedes.
present the
¿Dónde está?
document
Las personas con discapacidad de
on
la
persons
visibilidad
with
estadística
disability
al
from statistical
ejercicio de
visibility to the
derechos.
exercise
Invito
of
a
rights.
Simone,
I
¿cierto? Se llama
invite
Simone
Simone
Cecchini, director del Centro
Cecchini,
Latinoamericano y Caribeño de Demografía, quien tendrá a cargo la
who
presentación de dicho
will
documento
be
que como
in charge
Secretaría
of the
Técnica ha preparado
presentation of this
especialmente
document,
para
Director of the
esta
Latin
reunión con el
American
apoyo
Caribbean
de UNFPA, el
Demographic
Fondo
Center,
de Población
CELAPE.
de Naciones
This is
Unidas. Querido Simone.
supported by UNFPA.
Muchas gracias,
UNFPA.
presidente,
Thank
y
you
un
very
saludo a
much,
la mesa, a
President.
todas y todos. Para mí es de
Greetings
verdad un
to
gran
all of
gusto
you. It is a
poder
pleasure for
compartir los contenidos principales de este
share
informe
with you the main contents of this
sobre las personas con
report on
discapacidad, de la
persons with
visibilidad
disabilities
estadística
from
al ejercicio de
statistical
derechos.
visibility to the exercise of
Empiezo
rights.
con los
I would like
agradecimientos.
to
Este
begin by
informe
thanking
está
you.
disponible en
This
español, en
report is
inglés, también está
available in
disponible en
English and
formato
Spanish,
accesible en
also
los
in
dos
a
idiomas.
format
Nos agradecer en
accessible
primer
in the two
lugar la división de
languages. So
publicación, ahí
first, I
está
would like to
Salichón,
thank the
muchas gracias, no fue
publications
simple
department.
llegar a este
It wasn't
resultado.
simple to come to this result.
Agradecer a los
I
colegas del
would like to
SELADE
thank the
que
colleagues
contribuyeron
from CELADE who
a
have
la
contributed
redacción, Daniela
to the
González, Leandro
drafting, Daniela
Reboiras,
González,
y por
Leandro
supuesto
Reboiras,
agradecer
and
al
of course I
UNFPA
would
por el
like to thank
apoyo, sobre todo
UNFPA for
sustantivo,
the
los
support,
comentarios, los aportes
substantive
seguramente
support,
contribuyeron a
comments,
mejorar. Y dar
contributions
cuenta y
that helped us
agradecer a la
improve the
presidencia de
contents of this
Colombia
report.
que ha
And I
puesto
would
el
like to
tema
thank
al
the chair of
centro de esta
Colombia
conferencia. O
that
sea,
has put the
esto no es
topic
un
in the
esfuerzo
center of this
aislado. En
conference. This
Cartagena
is not an
tuvimos un
isolated
lindo
issue. In
panel
Cartagena, we
de
had
y
a very
sobre
beautiful
personas
panel
con
on
discapacidad.
persons
Se
with
ha lanzado el
disability.
grupo de
The
Cartagena, ha tenido ya
Cartagena
dos
group has been
reuniones,
launched. The
está
Cartagena group
avanzando
has
su
held two
agenda y
meetings
también el día de
by
mañana
now.
tendremos
And
otro panel
tomorrow
de
we will have
discusión
another
muy
panel
importante sobre la
on
persona con
persons
discapacidad.
with disabilities. The main contents are the following. First, to
El
see
tema de
which
la
is the
discapacidad y la
connection
agenda de
between
población y desarrollo.
disability
Segundo,
and
un zoom
the
sobre el tema de la
population and
información
development
estadística,
agenda,
sobre
then a
todo
zoom
en
on
la
production
fuente
of
oficial de
statistical
datos, los
information,
censos
especially
y las
the
encuestas de hogares.
official
En tercer
data,
lugar,
censuses and
usar
household
algunos de esos
surveys,
datos para dar
then to
un
use
breve
some of those
panorama
data
sociodemográfico de
to
la
give a
persona con
social demographic
discapacidad en
panorama
la
of
región
persons with
y
disability in the
concluir
region,
y hacer
and
alguna
conclude
recomendación.
with some
Entonces, sobre el primer
recommendations.
tema,
So on the
persona con
first topic,
discapacidad y
persons with
agenda de
disabilities and the
población
population
y
and
desarrollo,
development
reconocer
agenda,
que
we have to
desde el punto
recognize that from a conceptual point of view, significant progress have been made thanks to a growing utilization of the social and rights-based approach as compared with the previous perspective, the traditional biomedical perspective, according to which disability was an individual problem, an individual deficiency, whereas now the social and rights-based approach recognizes that the context matters, that there's discrimination, that there's stigma in the society, and that there are barriers in education, in health, in care that prevent the full participation and effective participation on an equal basis of persons with disability. And also this approach says that states and the society have a responsibility, which is a responsibility to eliminate barriers that limit inclusion and participation. So this moves us in public policies of our countries to take a leap in the paradigms so as to follow this social and rights-based approach. This approach tells us that disability is the product more than of individual problems of the society itself and of the power dynamics and relationships that exist within the society. What lies at the basis is the purpose of the Convention of Persons with Disability, which was approved in 2006 by 192 member countries, in force since 2008. And in the first bullet, we have the first article. It invites us to promote, to protect, and to ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. This is a convention that is legally valid. It's not of law. It has a regulatory value, and there's a commitment of states to undertake the necessary modifications and adjustments to the environment to make it accessible and inclusive. So there are legal requirements for the states to do this through their legislation and through public policies. Obviously, we also have connections with the 2030 agenda, which these links are not binding, but this is our agenda, the agenda of the United Nations from now to 2030. The 2030 agenda shares the calling to leave no one behind, to include, to promote participation in all the aspects of social life, and there are targets, goals of the SDGs that mention persons with disability in education, SDG 4, decent work, 8, equality, 10, cities, accessible cities, 11, transportation that was mentioned by Susanna, and in goal 17, alliances that includes statistics. Statistics is an important aspect. It's a political aspect as well, because visibility makes a difference, as we have seen for other groups of population.
United Nations report 2024 provides information on how we're going in measuring disability in SDGs indicators, with the result that all half of indicator we do have information over time, so we are able to measure the progress towards achieving the goal. But for 40% of the cases, we do not have all the indicators just for a specific point in time, so we are not able to measure progress. And finally, for 10%, we do not have indicators. So it's a calling. This is a global effort, but we need to make more effort to deaggregate indicators in order for the person with disability. When we have available indicators, we are able to show the situation, compare what is happening in the region as a whole, and in general, the significant gaps in the exercises of rights for persons with disabilities. This is an example. That is the rate of persons with disabilities that receive cash benefits in 2020. Or globally, we are in 34%, a third of persons with disabilities do receive some type of cash benefits. In some regions are much lower. In Latin America and the Caribbean, it's in an intermediate position. Some 50%, 58% of persons with disability receive some type of cash benefit, but we are far from developing developed work, which is universal access to cash benefits for persons with disabilities. This shows the difference that is related with the strength of the social protection system of each country and the development level. But it's a calling for making progress in our region in order to achieve universal coverage. And when we think about the connection between persons with disability and the agenda on population and development agenda, we go back to the program of action of the International Conference on Population and Development of Cairo, which is a guide for national international actions as to population and development. It's very clear that a specific chapter on persons with disability calling to full equality, the exercise of rights, and full participation in all aspects of social, economic, and cultural life for persons with disabilities. The regional expression of El Cairo is our Montevideo consensus that even though it does not have a specific chapter around persons with disability, it does consider them mainstreaming. And there is a calling for equality and a full achievement of rights. And also priority measures that are explicitly the number 50 promoting and ensuring gender mainstreaming and its intersection with race, ethnicity, age, social class, and disability status in all public policy. It's a calling to make progress in the Montevideo Convention. In the opening session, it was already mentioned, but we come from a conference at Cartagena in July 2024, where the resolution highlighted that countries pledged to reaffirm the strengthening of public policy to ensure full exercise of the rights of persons with disability. And we created the Cartagena group that held two meetings, and one they presented the work agenda in April this year, and in June we submitted the first joint committee with ICLAC population fund, a very technical official data sources on persons with disability in censuses and household surveys. The work program will continue in order for achieving this goal. In the second chapter on the production of statistical information, the topic of visibility, statistical visibility of person with disability is fundamental for change and transformation in order to design and put in place public policies that really help to achieve the rights of person with disability. And the calling and the source is the Convention on the Rights of Person with Disability, and it's Article 31 on collecting data and statistics that states that state will collect adequate information that will allow the state to formulate and apply policies, and also calls to de-aggregate data, and that this data will help to formulate public policies. This is a calling, but we are much aware that measuring disability is not simple. It is not simple because the concept of disability is a complex concept. Measuring this concept is also complex. There can be some problems of time compatibility among countries inside the same country. Sometimes data are collected with different ends. One thing is to measure prevalence, how many people among the population have persons with disability. Other thing is to know the data to assign benefits to some group of persons. So this is a calling that we need to realize that there's a lot of complexity around measuring disabilities. And just to deal with this complex issue, there's an expert group, the Washington Group, that provides global recommendation on how to measure disability. And here we show you some of those recommendations, the brief list of questions that has allowed the region to move forward and include this question in the population censuses and also in household surveys. This is a short, brief questions that include 6 domain: vision, hearing, mobility, cognition, the ability to remember, self-care, and communication. Obviously, these are not all the domains of disabilities. There are some lacking: mental health, psychosocial disability, but at least it's a very good point to start. Also recommendations, not only to make those questions, but the answer should not be a yes or no, but also to have gradual responses for the person can answer. Do you have difficulty viewing, even wearing glasses? No. Some difficulty, and statistically this is considered with a person without disability. But when the rate its vision say the people, I have a lot of difficulty seeing, or I cannot read, and any statistically this person is considered as a person with disability. And this is a recommendation from the Washington Group that here in the region we have created the sub-regional subgroup, the Buenos Aires subgroup, under the leadership of the INDEC of Argentina. And today many other countries in the region also are participating. So one thing is including the questions, and we will see how the questions are being included in the household surveys, but we need to move forward in methodological harmonization, ensuring compatibility, taking into account all the complex aspects that I would just mention. And for that, there is a lot of technical work, but also there's a participatory work. What we have seen in another field of statistics that is key, that person with disability organization representing them should be involved in the preparation of censuses and household surveys, so in order to be successful in the application. It's not something that is done closed doors without the involvement of persons with disability. What are the main results? In fact, if we consider the population censuses in our region, here we conducted an analysis for 19 countries. We have made very good progresses. If you see the bars here in 1990, a little more than half of the countries in 1990 in the census round 1990, you know that the rounds are every 10 for sorry, he corrects from 85 to 94. So around the year 1990, a little more than half of the countries included that question. In the 20 round census round, all countries included a question on disability. In the 2010 round, we can analyze if the recommendation from Washington Group was included or incorporated. Uh, 15%, 25% of the country did include, and in the final round, 63% of the country did include the social right approach, or the recommendation from the Washington Group did include the question. Also, there's a progress made in household surveys, even though in this domain it has not been a more even progress, particularly because not only you can take answer yes or no, it is fundamental to include gradual responses. Here, there are some examples of countries in which do included in their census question of the Washington Group question on disability. In this, there's a lot of different on prevalence. Guatemala, 2018, they only measured 2.8% of persons with disability as a percentage of the total population. Ecuador only Ecuador 7%. In other fields are vision, hearing impairment, and mobility impairment, so walking and moving. Also, by incorporating rigorously the question on disability in the population censuses, allow us to identify and see what is the territorial distribution at a very fine level. And here we have a map of Guatemala, the number of persons with disability at a municipal level. This is not only a game, that it can have a significant impact in the lives of people facing, when these countries have to face environmental challenges, when they prepare social environmental challenges, they can add climate change, the risk and disaster relief information of persons with disability living in the different municipality, because at the time of a natural disaster occurring, person with disability experience more difficulties in getting away of a disaster. Also, there is another exercises in seeing the rate of persons with disability in the most recent household survey in the year 2022. Percentages rather similar to the census's data, even though the years are different. For instance, Chile, this is a household survey, the CACEN 2022, give 9.7%. In the population census, then we have the raw information, the percentage is 9%. In Mexico, the survey is 6.8, a little less in the population census, and also Colombia, the census was more active, a little less in Colombia. But there's no significant difference that would invalidate our data from one or another source. Thanks to these sources that have some limitation, but they contribute with a very valuable information, we can also see some results. One of the first raw results are that how many person do have a person with disability considering the total population. This is a very basic average. We take this as a floor. That's basic. If we consider the final, the most recent population census with a simple average is on average 6.5%. This is a very basic raw data for censuses and the final 2020 round. It varies from a minimum from 2.8 up to 11.1% in Chile. And in the previous round, it was around 12%, Antigua and Barbuda, 12. And this is a minimum data that we have in order to decide how many real persons with disability represent the total population. Those data, the census data, also allow us to show something that is very important: how the disabilities by gender and by age group. The graph for 4 countries here, Ecuador, Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico, you can see the population pyramid in white. The third, Guatemala 2000 in the middle of a pyramid because the base is too wide. They have more children, less young people, persons age group, and then elderly. This is the white represent the total people without disability. But if we consider the pyramid between the person with disabilities, in the image is very difficult. In green, we have men, blue, women, and you can see that a qualitative point of view, where they have more population of person with disability is in the older elderly, because it's obvious as long as we age, we have a greater possibility of suffering from any disability. And this happens in the population, in the elderly over 80 years old, where there is some risk of the tendency to have some functional disability is greater risk. So this is why ECLA calls that by reinforcing the necessary care system to stress the care, the long-term care, and also this data allow us to, there is a prevalence of children and women, because women live.
Edad avanzada con discapacidad, además de haber estado a lo largo de su vida en gran parte prestando cuidado, pero ya llegó un momento que además ella misma necesitan cuidado. Así que hay todo un tema de igualdad de género que hay que considerar en nuestra política pública para justamente transformar esa situación injusta.
Regarding the overburden of care on women, the data also allow us to cross-match census data, survey data. This is from the census's disability with residents. And here we're seeing the proportion of persons with disability in urban areas, rural areas in green. And here in 4 countries, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, and Panama, the proportion of persons with disability is greater in rural areas, and also the proportion of persons with disability in urban areas, Paraguay and Guatemala. But the thing is that in rural areas, we know that life for persons with disabilities is particularly complex on account of the lack of access to services, distances, everything is far more difficult. And so these are greater barriers to a full participation in equal conditions within society. And also, the data show that persons with disability have lower levels of education. Here we compare persons with disability and without disabilities in 6 countries, and these are grouped regarding low level of education, less education, mean 7 to 12, or high 3 years and over. And you can see the differences. Persons with disability are overrepresented in the low education group and underrepresented in the high education level. On average, 2 to 3 years difference in terms of years of education. This is very concrete with hard figures that can be shown and that should, well, it's hoped that this changes in future. And also the difference in the world of education affects, of course, the world of labor and is crossed by another dimension, that is gender. On average in the region, we calculate that under 40% of persons with disability are part of the labor force. As you know, the labor force is the total number of persons who are employed plus those who are not employed. And when they do work, they have unstable jobs with low wages in comparisons with persons that do not have disabilities. And in general, the population with disabilities have higher rates of unemployment. And of course, this is crossed by gender. And here we see the employment rate is that purple triangle at the bottom, the rate of employment among women with disability is well below those of men with or without disabilities and women with disabilities. And so this also affects public policy. And all of this, education, health, work, mean that ultimately, what we see is higher levels of poverty and inequality among homes with a person with disabilities. There, the graph clearly shows this. Homes that in these 7 countries belong to quintile 1, that is the lower income quintile, have a higher proportion of persons with disabilities in comparison to households in the wealthiest quintile of the population. And this is not by chance. Households where there are persons with disabilities have more expenses linked to health, the special equipment required, and or in general what we're saying, a lower income for these persons with disabilities. So yet again, another call to strengthen the care systems, the support systems, so that persons with disabilities may live autonomously and not only depend on the support by relatives, which in general means the support by other women. And lastly, a few conclusions and recommendations. The messages, the main messages of the study, well, is recognizing that today the main sources to show the living conditions of persons with disabilities are censuses, household surveys. Let's care for this source, let's improve it. There are others, the administrative records, hopefully as well. But for in the meantime, these are the sources that we can use. And second, recognize that data may serve to draft policies and programs, hopefully based on this social rights approach. And recognition that in the region we have made headway in this, with of course certain nuances, but also measuring. We still have to move ahead in multilogical facets, and not all countries have made the necessary efforts. And the main call for participation by persons with disabilities be real in these statistical processes. Inclusion of persons with disabilities calls on us to recognize all the discrimination, stigma, and violence that exists in our society, the barriers. We must recognize them and hopefully overcome them in the various spheres of life, be the labor, family, health, but also the regulatory framework of our countries, the physical surroundings in our cities. Persons with disabilities more dependent, and this must be taken into account, especially the systems of care and especially long-term care. And the social and rights-based approach is also must be taken into account in social protection provided, which is so important with a due crossing by other aspects, especially gender. And to conclude here, we have recommendations that are not from this report per se, but the other of the UN in 2024 on disability and development, a joint effort among all UN agencies. And that, in fact, says many of the things that are relevant to our region. Harmonization of data, the issue of the relevance of taking into account disability in policies to reduce poverty and social protection policies, providing integrated health nearby where these persons with disabilities live. And then tomorrow we're going to hear about this in the panel, the policy to promote sexual and reproductive health for persons with disabilities and recognize their rights. Inclusive education with a universal and accessible design at schools, training the teachers and including disabilities in the world of investment for digital development and promote labor inclusion for persons with disabilities in equal conditions, have accessible mechanisms for reports of violence and discrimination. And once again, we return to the theme of engagement. We must strengthen the ability of civil society organizations to include persons with disabilities, supporting the victims of violence and the major current theme of access to systems of care and integral support. So I invite you to take into account the report to take it back to your countries and that we may truly have an impact on public policy and the life of persons with disabilities. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Simone Sechini, and for this very complete diagnosis on the leap into visibility of the population with disabilities. And now, Diana Mejina Molina from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Colombia, who will be presenting the report on the activities of the group of friends on the on the rights of persons with disabilities and the regional conference on population development, and an announcement that I think that we shared with Diana and Patricia, and that is that today this in Congress they passed the facultative protocol for persons with disabilities to take this leap in terms of this transit. Simone, who just spoke of the discourses and statistical visibility, moving on to the full enjoyment of rights for people with disabilities. And this, Colombia is a guarantor. It is a progressive country, and this is very good news that reaches up within the framework of this conference. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much, Vice Minister. First of all, I would like to thank you for the presentation of the report on persons with disabilities from statistical visibility to the enjoyment of rights. We congratulate Celade and the entire team led by the director for this document that we believe to be of vital importance and that should lead to an impact among those policymakers in the region. It is up to Colombia now to speak of the chair of the regional conference, and that we took on as chair in 2024. At the start, we considered a plan of work with activities and milestones focused on two pillars. The first, the one related to the group of friends of the chair, open group on the rights of persons with disabilities and the population and development group, the Cartagena group as it is known, and this group is of vital importance in order to lead to recommendations to move ahead with the integration of the population with disabilities, including them in the population and development agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean. And second, we have been developing themes of the fifth regional conference. And this line of work today is moving ahead with the development of an analysis of the population situation, and that we are also focusing on regarding migration, sexual and reproductive rights, climate change, and life cycle policies. For the first pillar, related to the Cartagena group, we would like to say that this group was created with a resolution of the fifth conference, and the aim is to analyze and examine possible strategies to move ahead in the integration of persons with disabilities and an intersectionality and cross-cuttingly contributing to the promotion and protection of human rights of this population. So therefore, in order to move ahead in this, the chair has carried out some activities. Some of these was already mentioned by the director of CELADE. The first milestone was a parallel event held within the framework of the Population and Development Commission under the heading Women's with Disabilities, Sexual and Reproductive Rights, held last April. At this event, a very important opportunity came up to make visible the barriers and inequalities faced by women with disabilities in enjoying their rights, in addition to promoting a space for integration with representatives of the panel for women in Colombia and practice rights, and the government of Mexico that we are grateful for, as well as ECLAC and UNFPA.
Last April 30th, we had a virtual meeting with a group of Cartagena, and specifically focal points and technical authorities participated in subjects of disabilities in order to share the objectives that were raised by Colombia within the framework of the Cartagena group. And hopefully it will be reflected as recommendations at the end of our chair, this or presidency. This had the participation of the whole region, sending a clear message about the importance of active collaboration of all countries and players involved to reach common objectives. We invite you all to keep on participating in these different activities. On June 25th, a second meeting, technical meeting, was held, also virtual meeting. Civil society accredited before ECLAC was invited. At that point, the document of data sources for persons with disabilities in Latin America from a social and rights approach prepared by CELADE and UNFPA. This document shows the progress of inclusion and questions of disabilities in the census of the region. Also identifies delays or lags in the household surveys. Among the main conclusions of this second meeting, we underlined the need of standardizing measurement tools in accordance with the Washington Group, mainly to see the participation of persons with disabilities in statistical groups. The interventions of countries reflected consensus about the urgency of improving quality, comparability, and accessibility of data, as well as the need to harness them and have a political influence in the formulation of inclusive policies. This was one first important step for consolidating recommendations that hopefully will be reached at the end of this process. Respected members of this presiding officers meeting and representatives of civil society. Also, we want to tell you what are the next steps in this Cartagena group. And we insist in the importance of open participation of all these stakeholders. First, we'll circulate after ending this presiding officers meeting through the Secretariat of CELADE and addressing persons and civil society a survey to compile perceptions about the progress and challenges in the inclusion of persons with disabilities based on the Convention about their rights. The results of the survey will be the input for the recommendations of the Cartagena Group. Second, after circulating the survey and having the feedback of all these stakeholders, the presidency will draft recommendations that will be subject to countries and will have the civil society participation. The objective is that these recommendations be a deliverable of the Cartagena Group in June of 2026. It's important to highlight that this first draft will encompass technical input of ECLAC and UNFPA, and that those that countries and civil society consider of importance to take into account. Among these inputs, we highlight the document that has just been presented and the other document that we submitted at the second meeting of the Cartagena Group on data sources for persons with disabilities. So I would like to mention as well the second component of our work plan, which is centered in developing subjects for the Regional Conference on Population and Development. And along this line of work, we are developing with UNFPA an exercise of comparative regional analysis inspired in the population-based analysis initiative to identify gaps and best practices in areas of change of life, sexual and reproductive rights. This exercise seeks to strengthen capacities, promote exchange of experiences, and accelerate the implementation of the measures of the Consensus of Montevideo. The proposal methodology was submitted in September 11th before representatives of government and underscoring its collaborative capacity. At that point, some countries expressed interest in the exercise and their experience in previously implemented exercises regionally. And in September 22, a survey in English and Spanish was circulated, and with the support of UNFPA and ASP clusters, to compile input and move forward in consolidating a technical UNFPA document. As pointed out in the side event today on data on policy and the analysis of regional population situation as a guide to implement the Consensus of Montevideo, we underscore the following progress. To date, there's one first draft of regional analysis of the chapters 2, 3, and 4, addressing context, demographic dynamics, gaps, and best practices. The technical team integrates all the results of the regional survey and refines the approach of life approach and intersectionality. 12 countries provided input with 180 actions in health, migration, and climate change. Then UNFPA will deliver a document that will be a strategic tool for planning public policies that are demographically sensitive and human rights, and also will allow to articulate these regional ASP with national sub-regional agendas to strengthen statistical capacities and evidence for decision-making. In summary, these results will be presented as a technical UNFPA document supporting the presidency of the presiding officers, and then recommendations will be developed by all parties. I would like to finish by referring to the last landmark of our presidency, and that will be tomorrow within the side event that's territory, vulnerability, and climate change. A space for discussion centered in the effects of climate change in vulnerable populations and local communities as a result of the preparation of COP30 in climate change in Belém do Pará next week. This event will promote a technical interdisciplinary dialogue about the impact of climate change on communities with special attention of communities in vulnerability, including women, local communities, and racial ethnic peoples. The approach will also focus in the relevance of citizen data, the local habits and key tools in order to strengthen territorial resilience. We invite you all to participate at 1 o'clock at the Enrique Iglesias room. So, tomorrow, that is. In this way, we conclude the report of the presiding officers of the Conference on Population and Development, and also expressing our acknowledgement and thanks to the countries and civil societies for their support in this process. We would like to particularly thank the Technical Secretariat of CELADE, Division of ECLAC, and UN Population Fund for all the support and permanent collaboration to reach and implement the objectives assumed by the presidency of the presiding officers. Your collaboration, technical support have been key in order to move forward in these common purposes. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Diana, for presenting the results of the last meeting in Cartagena. And now, beginning this moment, and bearing in mind the relevance of civil society, what we said at the beginning, we invite their statement, and for that I invite Sara Mendez Niebla, representing this the space of feminist networks, for this statement by civil society. Good afternoon. We, diverse women of Latin America and the Caribbean, articulated in the space of feminist networks integrated by girls, adolescents, youth, and adults, seniors, indigenous, Afro-descending, HIV carriers, home workers, sexual workers, trans, intersex, migrants, refugees, exiled and displaced, peasants, rural workers, academics, professionals, and trade union members. We greet the sixth meeting of the presiding officers of the Regional Conference on Population and Development in ECLAC, and we reaffirm our commitment with social justice, life sustainability, and the defense of all human rights. 31 years after the Declaration of Action and Platform of El Cairo, and the Consensus of Montevideo being the most advanced document in sexual and reproductive rights at regional and global level, we recognize the Cartagena Agreement, including all persons, especially girls and adolescents and women with disabilities that were not made visible in development and population conferences. Women, feminists, recognize all the achievement of actions given the action of women. However, today there is a weakening of multilateralism and corporate capture of democratic levels and high public debt and fiscal tax evasion, and discourses of hatred, and that really erode rights that have been achieved and deepen structural inequalities. In view of these challenges, three priorities. First, recover the deep sense of multilateralism and international cooperation, not as an empty diplomatic exercise, but an effective tool to transform living conditions of our communities. Commitments that should become sustainable public policies with financing. And second, to maintain the progressive position of this region in vis-a-vis the conference of 2026 and ensure to take into account the implications of emerging digital technologies like AI for gender equality, with emphasis in digital equality with the gender approach and perspective. The ability of women to close the gap in this area and gender violence facilitated by digital technologies drive data that are driven by sex, race, migration situations, sexual orientation, disabilities, and other characteristics. Third, ensure substantive participation of civil society, especially of feminist movements and of Latin America and the Caribbean in the analysis of the possible merge of UN Women and UNFPA. This should be done with transparency and ensure that any decision will strengthen mandates in matters of equality, gender violence, access to justice, and reproductive and sexual rights. We urge the states to maintain and deepen commitments of the Consensus of Montevideo and exercise political will in order to guarantee economic, physical, and political autonomy of women, girls, and adolescents with social justice and a life free of violence. We need to guarantee the full right of of persons with disabilities, ensuring accessibility, autonomy, independence, including legal capacity and significant capacity of their organizations that are very scarce in this area, especially in these 6 presiding officers. They need to have a more humanizing agenda, an economic, social, political, and cultural sustainable model, guaranteeing equality and justice, putting the life and the care support at the center and the full inclusion of all persons. From our movements, we will continue promoting deep transformations until having seen the happiness of everyone.
Gracias a Sara.
Thank you, Sara. We thank you for your statement, and we take note of all the reivindications of the civil society which have a particular relevance. These meetings wouldn't have a meaning if it wasn't for that kind of participation. Now, we open the floor for statements by delegations on national progress in implementing the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development. Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, Ecuador, and El Salvador. And then we will offer the floor to the other delegations. Colombia, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we committed ourselves in the 5th meeting from Colombia, we express our desire, and the effort for persons with disability. They represent at least 16% of the world population, and according to PAHO, 12% in Latin America. This means that about 66 million persons, and in Colombia, 7% of the total population of the country. In that sense, the government of Colombia would like to reaffirm the commitment with the full inclusion of this population, recognizing its right to fully participate in society and to enjoy equal opportunities. The cross-cutting approach to disability is fundamental to advance towards a truly sustainable, equitable, and inclusive system in agreement with the 2030 agenda without leaving anyone behind. Colombia has signed the Inter-American Convention against the discrimination of persons with disability, the Marrakesh Convention, which today has been ratified through the approval of a facultative protocol through which it is guaranteed that there will be application of the convention for the population with disability. The commitment is very important for the population with disability, and in Colombia we recognize that from the point of view of intersectionality, disability affects in a disproportionate manner certain groups like poor persons, the elderly, women, and also in this sense, it is fundamental to advance in the commitment 50 of the Montevideo Consensus on Gender Equality. Amongst the national advances, we have the new ministry, which is in charge of the disability system, and we are working from there in the updating of public policy regarding disability in a participatory way. The national care system is also created in 1994, and there's also in 1993 the dignification of persons who provide care. We have the legal capacity law of 2019, recognizing the will and autonomy of the persons with disability for decision making with the necessary support for the definition of their life projects. Colombia has advanced in the preparation of statistics, implementing over 565,000 persons evaluated in the country as of September 2025, strengthening self-recognition with the registry of localization and characterization of persons with disability. Regarding the laboral aspect, we have complied with the goal of inclusion with 17,000 persons employed and connected to the public sector. Likewise, the registry of caretakers and personal assistants has been created. Even though the Montevideo Consensus doesn't speak specifically about persons with disability, Colombia says it is necessary to include it in the agenda of population and development, emphasizing integral rehabilitation, habilitation. These are pillars to guarantee inclusion and the well-being of all persons. With this framework and in agreement with the National Population of Aging 2022, 2023, 2031, we promote a good aging, good care, a life free of violence as a means to prevent disability. This vision is strengthened with the leadership of our country in the Cartagena Group, which tries to examine strategies and generate diagnosis, as well as articulate efforts to advance in the inclusion of persons with disability and contribute in that way to the protection of their rights in Latin America and the Caribbean. So we invite you to be a part of the work of this group, which next year will provide public policy recommendations to the conference. This is a report from Colombia, and we thank this last calling that we make for you to continue connected so that we can make progress in these topics. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Patricia. I have, let me see if I'm missing someone, but I have Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, Ecuador, Salvador, Mexico, Panama, Peru, Paraguay, Brazil, Dominican Republic, and Uruguay. I don't know if I'm missing someone. Venezuela. All right, so now we recognize the delegation of Costa Rica. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, delegations, representatives of the civil society. For Costa Rica, it is an honor to participate in the space of dialogue and cooperation, which reaffirms our commitment with sustainable development, with human rights, and with the well-being of our population. For my delegation, it is particularly satisfactory to say that today we are complying with the mandate that Costa Rica has promoted for several years of paying particular attention to the public policy actions carried out in reference to the inclusion of persons with disability. We have presented, the national progress has been presented regarding the implementation of the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development. Therefore, we would like to thank the Presidency of Colombia, with which we coincide in what the delegate has just mentioned, the need to have a cross-cutting approach for the population and development agenda in everything that relates with persons with disability. We thank the presentation of the report by ECLAC on persons with disability. This is a topic we will analyze in more depth in the second panel tomorrow. Dear delegates, in the national progress regarding the international agreements of sustainable development, and particularly regarding the Montevideo Consensus, we believe it is fundamental to have carry out efforts to have a modern public planning, coherent public planning, and evidence-based. First, I would like to share the progress made in the implementation of the first Development Plan 2023-2026 in public policies, which integrates the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development from the methodology to the indicators of each public intervention. We believe that this is a good practice, a coherent practice between national planning and the international commitments assumed by Costa Rica. During 2024, Costa Rica presented the voluntary national report on the SDGs, and there we underline the approach-based, the social-based approach, the rights-based approach. After the National Population Census and Housing Census of 2022, the National Statistics Institute and Censuses updated population projections by age and sex up to 2050, thus strengthening the subnational database. So we hope to continue to have the technical assistance that we need and that we have received so far. Likewise, there was a modernization of the system of indicators to follow the SDGs. The municipality indicators have also been updating, and we're also updating the indicators for the Montevideo Consensus. All these inputs are consolidated as strategic tools for the preparation of the populational situation analysis that should be completed by the end of 2026. That will be the basis of the new development plan for 2027-2030, thus ensuring the continuity of a public planning based on evidence. As to persons with disability, in collaboration with the Population Fund of the United Nations and the Latin American Alliance of Women with Disability, Costa Rica has promoted the strengthening of the Montevideo Consensus from the point of view of persons with disability. This was a proposal presented for the first time in the meeting of the presiding officers, and that has allowed to review more than 140 indicators. 50 new ones have been proposed that have been included in different voluntary reports. At present, in Costa Rica, we continue to fine-tune quantitative indicators in coordination with the National Statistics Institute and National Censuses Division. The Montevideo Consensus has also been incorporated into the long-term perspective in the National Strategic Plan to 2050, projecting targets to 2030, 40, and 50. This tool is a turning point in the demographic reflection of the country, taking into account that as of 2045, the population of Costa Rica will start decreasing. This is one of the main challenges that we face. And the impact of this situation in our security system for the population requires deep analysis. Dear delegates, this progress that we present regarding the planning in this area are due to our national approach, and also we have it thanks to sustained technical work. The Costa Rican state is committed with public policies based on data and on inclusion of Afro-descendants, indigenous people, the elderly, persons with disability, and others. This reflects as well an ethical commitment with the present and future generations. Of course, there's still a lot to do, and we need to consolidate positive trends, and we need to generate the necessary financing mechanisms to support all this work in an international context that we know is challenging today, and in a context of climatic vulnerabilities that affect our sub-region. In this international context that is changing, Costa Rica reiterates its commitment and its calling to reinforce multilateralism, more solidarity and international interaction. In this sense, we believe that only through alliances, mobilizing resources, knowledge, and commitment, we will be able to advance in the common agenda that we have today, the agenda of a society of care and the shared dream of a more inclusive dream world and more inclusive world. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. Now we give the floor to the delegation of Cuba. Thank you, Mr. President. I want to congratulate you and the work of your country as the chair of the presiding officers and also the other members of the presiding officers, my colleagues from the population fund from the Celada congratulating Simona for the excellent document that they have presented and the ICLAC Secretariat. I'm not going to read, I'm going to explain specific points that I want to stress, and I want to comply with what the chairmanship said. And October the 8th, they say to speak little and to present something novel. But first, Cuba continued to privilege population topics as an exercise of fundamental human rights and giving priority to focus. The first ministry of the Republic is the one that controls, design, and activates population themes in my country. Second, from the regional conference in Cartagena last year, we approved a decree on the system for comprehensive care of life. We created a new institution for its application and development. I'm not saying that we didn't have anything before, but now we have perfected and developed it in depth. And third, the new law code on childhood, adolescence, and youth policies, and a new law 2425 of citizenship, migration, that makes more inclusive and rigorous those processes. Fourth, a new decree law on official statistics that based on fundamental principles of the United Nations statistic is carried out in my country and my office or bureau, along with a regulation to measure and analyze these processes. In other words, what you don't measure, you do not know. When you don't know something and don't know make it socially, it's not solved. Therefore, statistic is a significant part in developing population and development system, and also in persons with disability. Fifth, all of the above in a very aggressive international context, very aggressive towards my country, particularly with the presence of the commercial financial blockage that for more than 6 decades the government of the United States had put in place against our country. That today, specifically a few hours ago, the General Assembly of the United Nations unanimously, or 90% of the countries voted against this policy of blockage and supported my country and my people. Finally, six, reaffirmed Cuba's pledge to the consensus of Montevideo Consensus and the program of action of El Cairo and its improvement from 2024 and the 2030 agenda and its element like SDGs and goals and indicators in order to not leaving anyone behind. Now I give the floor to the delegation of Ecuador.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the presiding officers, dear authorities, dear friends. From Latin America and the Caribbean looking for better opportunities. My greeting from President Daniel Noboa. And I want to start my presentation, my statement along three main axes. First, the progress made in implementing the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development. Second, opportunities and challenges we have in the demographic aspect. And finally, the inclusion of persons with disability in the agenda of population and development with a stress in the importance of reinforcing their rights and reinforcing public policies for their full participation in society. In health and reproductive rights in this matter in 2024, we have had over 700,000 intervention in targeting teenagers from 10 to 19 years old, reinforcing the services adapted to the needs of young people. More than 1,000 establishment of first care, health care has been classified as a comprehensive friendly health center for youth, where our youth can be cared through the comprehensive project for sexual and reproductive health. Also, specifically, we have reduced the rate of teen fertility rate, particularly in the group 15 to 19, advancing with the prevention of human papilloma and cancer associated to this papilloma virus by vaccination of children and boys and girls. In this population, more than 500 girls were vaccinated and boys. And for the first time, we included boys starting at 9 years old in the equality of rights and violence. In 19, we reinforced the agenda of equality and prevention of gender violence in the policy and regulation. We approve key laws and the organic law for the eradication of violence and harassment in all the workplace. In violence, we manage more than 7,000 measures for immediate protection of women victims of and more than 1,000 new new milestone, and we included the violent centers for people affected with violence. Also, the methodological guide and socialized of public policies for equal treatment. And also, we trained over 1,000 public servants, and we also trained people for in order to create safe institutions to protect violence against women. Regarding persons with disability in 2024, we consolidated progress in inclusion, protection and sensibility and protection for persons with disability. Over 64,000 persons with disability and 7,000 cares are actively in work. We realized inspection in company in order to see they meet the 4% of mandatory inclusion. We incorporated people to the human rights services, and more than 1,000 received cash benefit, either conditional and unconditional. And also, we reinforced the organic law for mental health, and we actualized the measure of qualification for disability in agreement with the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disability, promoting the sensitivity by the using technologies of education for students with disability as to reduction of inequality since the implementation of the national strategy in Ecuador, the prevalence of chronic malnutrition in children under 24 months was reduced in 2 percentage points. We established the 1,000 days bonus for pregnant women and children that received this transfer. So we have been able to reduce this rate. Also, 39% of children under 24 months and pregnant women have comprehensive services, record of birth rates, cash transfer and services from the Ministry of Human Development. We continue with the mobility, access, integration, and migration. During the period reported, we reinforced the services and program targeting persons in human mobility, and we granted more than 1 million consular services, including the issue of visas, improving the efficiency and accessibility of procedures. In employment, we formalized more than 4,000 employments and stages with agreement with many countries, with Spain, Austria, Germany, and France. In the international cooperation, we approved 32 initiatives and cooperation, South-South cooperation for the 24-26 period through mixed technical cooperation commission as to youth and adult. In the period analyzed, we reinforced the actions oriented to the welfare of elderly and youth through schools. 380 years from 15 to 18 years old were trained to improve their abilities and reinforce their participation in the food industry. In the support of elderly population, more than 300,000 persons in extreme poverty receive cash benefits, ensuring their dignified access to a more fair and participatory economy. Finally, the opportunities that we have detected, we have made significant progress in health and social protection by in the reduction of teen fertility rate, the application of access to reproductive and health services has permitted to give real the vaccination against papilloma virus extended to boys and youth protects and reduces the morbidity rate. In parallel, we have been able to improve intergenerational coverage, integrating persons with disability and elderly. Laws, advancement in the eradication and the attention to the victims consolidates a more what are the challenges ahead of us as a country is financial sustainability that in spite that of the efforts that we are making, there's still a strong inequality among genders between men and women. And this restrict the economy and women's autonomy and affects the whole system. In health, there's still a high rate of teen fertility rate. So we need to focus the services. We need more investment and specialization. And finally, the chronic, long-term diseases, particularly for elderly people, provides an early alert, and we need to identify greater efforts. As to public policies, we have moved forward in regulatory normalization by improving the measure of disabilities and with a focus of rights and non-discrimination. In the organic law for mental health favors in the integral comprehensive service for people with mental health problems. 4% of mandatory contracted in the sectors in public and private companies with specialized programs. The social protection can ensure support with persons by promoting finally there's inclusive and future activities in tourism that promote full participation through initiatives adapted the access of technologies, and finally, Ecuador reaffirmed its commitment with the continuous implementation of priority measures established in the Montevideo Consensus, oriented to ensure welfare, equity, and the full exercise of right of the whole population, with a specific targeting vulnerable group promoted by this instrument. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the delegation of El Salvador. Thank you very much for the report presented. El Salvador reaffirmed its commitment with the full implementation of the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development, acknowledging that the guidelines are the essential framework to reinforce public policies oriented towards the welfare of all people without any discrimination. It is in this context that the country has fostered specific actions to ensure full integration of persons with disability, considered as an indispensable condition for social development, community cohesion, and the full exercises of human rights. In the recent year, El Salvador have made progress in consolidating the institutional regulatory solid framework with specific law of inclusion of persons with disability reformed in 2023. The same law established as of public interest the full inclusion of persons with disability across the society. This law prohibits discrimination and ensures reasonable adjustment either in public and private institutions, and also that the state must eliminate the barriers that hinder the development of those people by promoting a universal design in all institutions.
El país ha desarrollado programas de atención.
Programs of rehabilitation and inclusive participation, same as the training for civil servants in order to reduce structural and cultural barriers that still restrict their full participation. These efforts are supplemented by the variable of disability in the 7th Population and Housing Census 2024, which reflected that 4.9% of the Salvadorian population reported having some sort of disability. This is crucial for the formulation of inclusive public policy based on evidence and precise statistics. Salvador recognizes that the inclusion of persons with disabilities is imperative for human rights, but also a key factor to achieve equitable and sustainable development. Within that framework, the state continues to strengthen institutional capacities, promoting universal access and encouraging the active engagement by persons with disabilities as key players of social transformation. In this context, transformation of a new El Salvador has significantly contributed to the well-being of the population, including persons with disabilities, with the implementation of more effective safety policies have resulted in safer settings for the full participation in community, cultural, and sports life. In the sphere of health, primary health care has been strengthened, ensuring quality care and prevention programs adapted to the needs of persons with disabilities. Likewise, cultural events and sports events inclusive have been organized, promoting inclusion, physical activity, and social cohesion, reflecting an integral setting for human development. In line with the commitments taken on through the Montevideo Consensus, our country has put in motion the strategic plan, removing barriers, guided to strengthen institutionality, modernizing services, and extending integral care for persons with disabilities, giving priority to areas such as health, education, justice, access, in order to ensure equal conditions and promoting effective inclusion in all spheres of life. The chair, El Salvador recognizes that ensuring the inclusion of persons with disabilities contributes directly to the reduction of social gaps, strengthening human capital, and sustainability of development throughout the life cycle. And therefore, we implement the national policy for co-responsibility for care, ensuring appropriate care for all people, especially those who have historically taken on these care responsibilities, and promoting the autonomy and well-being of persons with disabilities. In terms of opportunities, my country is moving ahead in the promotion of decent work and employment for persons with disabilities through the program for labor inclusion, saying that companies must at least hire one person with disabilities for every 20 employees on their payroll, encouraging labor inclusion, equal opportunities, and economic sustainability. In the field of education, they've strengthened inclusion by handing portable computers adapted to the needs of students with disabilities. These include braille keyboards, voice recognition programs, and other tools which facilitates learning by persons with disabilities, visual, auditory, and other forms of disabilities. This equipment is part of a continuous program in the country to close the digital gap, ensuring equitable access to education and strengthening the autonomy of students. El Salvador once again renews its commitment to the Montevideo Consensus, promoting a society where inclusion is a daily practice and persons with disabilities are the key players of that change and also of national development. I would like to thank the unconditional support received through the UNFPA offices in El Salvador and regionally. Thank you. Thank you. The nation of Mexico is now recognized.
Perdón. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here once again. My greetings to the members of presiding officers and the delegations present. On behalf of the government of Mexico, I would like to ratify the validity of the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development. The National Population Program in Mexico is directly aligned to the promotion of certain measures. It is a key reference for our public policies. Mexico has been able to achieve substantive progress in implementing the Montevideo Consensus with a rate of 1.7 children per woman and 0.8 of annual growth to slow the growth of the population, and reducing fertility is no longer a challenge, but postponing the age of unions and the maternity of girls and adolescents. The rates are inadmissible. And also further social mobility and the autonomy of women by greater access to secondary and higher education, as well as formal employment, with a humanist approach inspired for the good of all, first of all, and with a historical investment in over 6 years, 3.5 million people were able to overcome poverty and 1.7 million from extreme poverty. In parallel, there is a drop of 4 points in the Gini coefficient for the first time. Mexico holds second lowest place in inequality among the countries of the Americas. Progress is related to the increase in the minimum wage of 116% and scholarships to more than 13 million students, universal pension of $168 a month to all people over the age of 65 years of age at least, in addition to 1.5 persons with disability who receive monthly cash transfers of $82. And for the first time this year, we distributed a similar support to all Mexican women aged 60 to 64 years of age in compensation for the years dedicated to unpaid care work. This year, 2025, it has been declared as the Year of Indigenous Woman by Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum, the President of Mexico. And I would like to point out the need to have synergy between this conference and the regional conference on women in Latin America and the Caribbean, that currently chaired by my country. As occurred throughout the region, Mexican population is aging. Under the current administration, we are building an intergenerational strategy for change in the age structure, together with 17 federal institutions that make up the National Population Council and the 32 state population councils, as well as inputs from academia and the organizations that make up the Citizen Consultative Council. We are building this strategy that pursues guiding health and education policies towards development, employment, and housing, pensions, and the national care system, turning it into a system that is now barely under construction at a time for dialogue in order to unify the common framework for reference and a diagnosis that is identifying the public centers that are already offering services but that need to work in a coordinated manner. The strategy, the intergenerational strategy, before changes to the age structure, it seeks to strengthen solidarity among generations and contemplates substantive equality approaches, diversity, and cultural relevance. With more than 100 million of the Mexican population at working age, which we see as a demographic bonus, and for the following 3 decades represent a great opportunity to be made the most of. The challenge is to extend access to formal work and market increase of half of Mexican women that are still out of it. Also, increase contributory pensions to which only 42% of men have access and 25% of women. So along this path, and to overcome the imbalance and regional connectivity, the President of Mexico this year began the construction of 15 poles of development, including the building of 1 million houses. The building of 1 million houses and more than 3,000 kilometers of railway lines. With major challenges, my friends, Mexico reaffirms in this way its commitment to the Montevideo Consensus as a guideline to reduce inequality, ensuring facts and placing people at the heart of our activities. Thank you. Panama is recognized.
Muy buena.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chair, in an effort by the national government coordinated by the Ministry of Social Development, the Technical Secretariat of the Social Cabinet, and with the cooperation of the UN Population Fund in Panama, drafted a report that addresses the Panama approach to the Montevideo Consensus. This spanned a period of 2018 through 2022 and reviews implementation of priority measures of the Montevideo Consensus, presenting good practices and challenges in each thematic area. It contains themes such as the full integration of population in sustainable development, the rights and needs and demands of children, girls and boys and adolescents, and young people, aging, social protection, and socioeconomic challenges, universal access to sexual and reproductive health services, gender equality, international migration, and the protection of human rights of migrant persons, territorial inequality, spatial mobility, and the rights of indigenous people, as well as combating racism and racial discrimination. Efforts have been directed at not only the population in general, but specifically vulnerable groups, including girls, boys, and adolescents, women, the Afro-descendant community, indigenous people, migrant persons, persons with disabilities, and the elderly. In Panama, we've implemented laws for integral protection of childhood, adolescence, integral health programs, prevention of adolescent pregnancies, and prevention of violence, and also mechanisms for effective participation for adolescents and young people.
Se destaca el compromiso.
The commitment of the country to promote full-fledged youth in general, an integral approach in protection of rights and development of adolescents and children in Panama. Panama has implemented measures for healthy aging, the protection of rights, the prevention of pathological aging, and guarantee food and health of the elderly. Different measures have been adopted to guarantee universal access to the services of reproductive and sexual services, to have friendly clinics, specialized clinics, prevention and treatment of HIV/AIDS and diseases of sexual communication, reduction of maternal mortality and morbidity, participation of men, and standards for safe and quality access to sexual and reproductive health. Also policies for land management, preservation of wetlands, sustainable forest development, and disaster risk management. Programs of access to houses, ownership, citizen security and basic services, utilities for vulnerable populations. Also, decentralization has been promoted, participation in territories and environmental safety, building infrastructure and promoting renewable energies. Significant progress has been achieved in the acknowledgement of indigenous peoples' rights in different aspects, promoting integral development and respecting cultural diversity, recognizing land rights, promoting the construction and implementation of participatory public policies, preserving traditional medicine, indigenous culture, and the identification and providing protection against violence and discrimination among women, children, adolescents, and youth. Panama has achieved major progress in the promotion and protection of the rights of Afro-descending peoples through the implementation of legal frameworks, policies, and programs preventing discrimination, the existence of institutions, relevant programs, the relevance of the rights of Afro-descending, and care for those who have been unequally treated, and also in the design of public policies, the strengthening of access to health and the promotion of development and inclusion, generation of knowledge through studies and surveys, Jointly, all these efforts are evidence of the commitment of Panama for full participation and well-being of the whole population. Thank you very much. Peru now has the floor.
¿Aló? Muy buenas tardes, señoras, señores.
Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, members of ECLAC, of UNFPA, heads of government, here present, civil society organizations, academia, all the persons that really enable and make possible this event. I'd like to present the progress and advances of the Montevideo Consensus in 3 dimensions among all the indicators that we have published in a table that we update every single year from the intersectoral committee we have in Peru. First, population aging, that is one also linked to the subjects of this session. The sustained reduction of fertility and those areas regarding the labor environment. As to population aging, this increase, as you have said, it is related to a rise in life expectancy. In Peru, is 77.4 years, with an average of 80 years for women and 74.7 for men. And this was in 2024. Between 2022 and 24, the health insurance coverage increased from 84.6% to 90%. We are approaching 100% coverage now. Likewise, in this period, the affiliation to Social Security grew from 37 to 41%, also with contributions to those who are aging. A standard has been approved where there's a minimum pension applicable to public and private systems, establishing a common minimum for all the senior citizens. And in 2026, all the persons over 75 years in situation of poverty will be included in the PNS 75 program, non-extreme poverty. This aging has several phases. It's not only this increase in life expectancy, improvement in life conditions, but also involves challenges and demands coordinated responses in order to ensure a decent, active and safe aging of senior citizens. We need to bear in mind that in Peru, many of the rural centers are beginning to be unpopulated or having a lot of population that mainly only the elderly stay in a lonely state. And this is a challenge for health services and it's greater because they're so distant and because they need more specific public health services. In the case of the reduction of fertility in 2017, in the age group of 15 to 19, the fertility rate was 53 births per 1,000 women. And in 2024, only 40 in the case of those from 20 to 24, from 22 to 24, went down from 81 to 73. And gradually women defer maternity. Average age of mothers who have their first child is 22 years of age. Also between 22 and 25, there was a decline of more 100 live births in the age group of 20 to 34 years of age, a significant reduction. On the other hand, that's also related to fertility. Adolescent pregnancy has declined in 1 point from 9 to 8. Although this dynamics of adolescent pregnancy has a lot of challenges to be answered and met. In the labor environment, also between 22 and 24, informality was reduced from 84.6 to 81.2. That's an important progress to strengthen labor rights and provide access to social benefits. Likewise, the proportion of youth that don't study nor work went down from 17 to 15.9%, reflecting the commitment of the state to include this sector, especially for capacity building in youth. As to households or homes, with persons that have severe disability, with an impact on labor rights, of course, and especially among the users of the Contigo program that receive a pension for persons with severe disabilities. The proportion of mothers is over 70%. Mothers, households, mothers have worse employability conditions and greater difficulties for their quality of life. The study of UNICEF shows that there is an increase of disabilities. Those mothers that are caregivers, the quality of life of these caregivers is much more difficult, especially in these single parent households. All these indicators and the others published in the control board in Peru show the implementation of the consensus of Montevideo, but also in addition to these subjects, we are working in a platform at district level on population dynamics that's called the Info Population that also will be updated with the census of this year. We'll have new updated information in 2026. And with that, surely we will be able to have greater specificity and accuracy of those persons that are dedicated to care, those that are in a situation of disability that have not yet been mapped in the programs we are providing. And also this last block will allow us to have information about the population dependence and how is this related to aging and fertility reduction that is experienced by Peru and other countries of the region. We are convinced that with the joint effort and regional cooperation will build a resilient and prosperous future for Latin America and the Caribbean, and we reaffirm our commitment, active community, in line with the roadmap set forth at the consensus of Montevideo. Paraguay now has the floor. Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished delegations, representatives of civil society, international agencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this very important meeting of best practices and exchange of best practices. We celebrate the document on persons with disabilities as well as the population observatory and the analysis of the regional population held this morning, important documents that will help all of our countries in this theme. In my country, public policies addressing populations in situation of vulnerability are articulated with the international commitments assumed by Paraguay within the consensus of Montevideo and other regional and universal mechanisms. We are working to present our third voluntary report next year. We have identified the following progress. Paraguay has given an important step forward for full inclusion of persons with disabilities, launching the first Atlas on Disability in Paraguay, presented in December 2024. This instrument is a technological unprecedented innovation in the region and is the result of the strategic strategic partnership between the Secretariat of Human Rights and Persons with Disabilities and the National Statistical Institute with the support of IDB. The Atlas turns the statistical information into evidence for action, integrated data from 26 agencies and state entities committed to the National Plan for the Human Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Through an interactive platform, it allows to view, identify the gaps in employment and service access and guides the orientation of public policies in line with the spirit of the Consensus of Montevideo. Likewise, the country is implementing phase 2 of this atlas, designed to strengthen sustainability and quality of statistical information through the harmonization of administrative records and the adoption of one single instrument for measuring the variable of disability that has reached a consensus among all public institutions. This effort evidences the commitment of Paraguay with data that are indispensable for accountability of inclusive policies. Jointly, all these actions reflect a view of the state that shows statistical visibility moving to the enforcement of rights, turning Paraguay in the region in matters of inclusive approaches and sustainable development. In the migration area, it promotes public policies designed to standardization, regularization of migrant persons consistent with the international guidelines on migration workers. Through the National Migration Institute, there is a Migra Móvil program that is a service that brings all the services closer to distant communities and border areas, facilitating documentation and social inclusion of migrant persons. In the area of community integration, the country promotes different initiatives strengthening intercultural coexistence and the acknowledgement of contribution of migrant communities to national development. Here we have a No Border Fair organized by First Lady, the National Secretariat of Tourism, and these are spaces of cultural exchange between Paraguay and the foreign communities, celebrating diversity and multicultural situation of the country. The National Feast of Collectivities in Itapú, impulsada por la
The Week of Diversity, promoted by the Culture Secretariat. With Afro-descendant peoples, Paraguay has enhanced its institutionality to promote the rights of Afro-descendants with the support of CONAFRO through Decree 2915 from 2024. This is presided over by the National Secretariat of Culture and integrated by key institutions of the state with the mandate of promoting Law 600-940 to coordinate public policies with social participation. In this framework, we make progress in the preparation of the National Promotion Plan of Human Rights for Afro-descendants, articulated with processes that are ongoing through the 2050 integration plan. We have the National Registry of Afro-descendants in charge of INE, and also education and sanction of discriminatory actions in order to ensure respect and equality. This progress reflects the will of Paraguay to continue to strengthen its institutional and statistic framework to guarantee that no one is left behind in the path towards sustainable development and social justice. Our country is committed to cooperate and exchange good practices with the other states of the region. Thank you very much.
La palabra Brasil.
Brazil has the floor.
Minha saudação à mesa diretora, aos representantes dos estados parte e da sociedade civil aqui presente. Para nós, Brasil, é uma honra participar.
Brazil aims at an inclusive system, a fair and sustainable system.
O consenso de Montevideo
The Montevideo Consensus of Population and Development of Latin America and the Caribbean represents an advancement which includes women.
Los temas de población en nuestra región. Brasil ha contribuido a fortalecer la cooperación regional, la agenda de población y desarrollo, con el objetivo de incluir los grupos poblacionales que todavía siguen siendo dejados atrás, especialmente las personas con deficiencia, la población afrodescendiente, los pueblos originarios, las comunidades tradicionales, las mujeres y la población LGBT y más. En el 95 se creó la Comisión Nacional de Población y Desarrollo en Brasil, que fue terminada por el gobierno anterior, sin embargo, recreada en el 2024 por la gestión del presidente Lula da Silva. Hoy día Brasil tiene un compuesto, una comisión activa en la presidencia de la República con representación del Estado y sociedad civil para el monitoreo de la agenda de desarrollo y población. Brasil tiene compromiso de implementar el consenso de Montevideo. Mañana vamos a compartir algunas de nuestras prácticas y desafíos que el gobierno de Brasil ha tomado para sí. Nuestro foco ha sido en la transición demográfica, en la alineación con los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, la promoción e igualdad de género, envejecimiento poblacional y personas con deficiencia. Desde el 2023, Brasil trabaja en la búsqueda de la paz, y en el desarrollo, el combate al hambre, la pobreza y desigualdad, la defensa de los ODS y enfrentar las crisis climáticas que afectan en forma desigual y distinta a los grupos poblacionales. Se recrearon los ministerios de Derechos Humanos, Agricultura Familiar y el Ministerio de las Mujeres, que dialogan directamente con los compromisos del gobierno de Brasil con el Consenso de Montevideo. Brasil retomó la agenda de igualdad de género con asignación de recursos para
em todas as suas diversidades, com foco no enfrentamento à violência de gênero, o fortalecimento da autonomia econômica, a promoção da participação política das mulheres em todo o país. Com espírito de solidariedade entre os povos, sediaremos em 10 dias a COP30, pela primeira vez na Amazônia, que regionalmente dividimos na cidade de Belém do Pará. A mesa diretora, e ao presidente e a todos aqui presentes, o Brasil acredita que a construção das políticas públicas deve ser orientada pela ampla participação democrática e temos alocado esforços na retomada dos canais de participação social. Reestabelecemos conselhos de direitos em diferentes temas associados ao Consenso de Montevideo. Retomamos a realização de conferências nacionais de políticas públicas que foram extintas também pelo governo anterior. A participação social foi ampliada nos últimos anos. Nos últimos 2 anos, realizamos conferências para a definição de prioridades em políticas públicas que não eram ocorridas há quase 10 anos. E reuniram-se milhares de pessoas na Conferência Nacional de Igualdade Racial, das Mulheres, da população LGBTQIA+, dentre outras. Ainda realizaremos em dezembro a Conferência da Assistência Social, dos Direitos da Pessoa Idosa e dos Direitos Humanos. Estamos alocando nossa população no coração dos debates governamentais, com o objetivo de promover justiça social, justiça tributária, ampliar os direitos humanos de todas as pessoas, garantir igualdade de gênero, enfrentar o racismo, o etnismo, o etarismo e o capacitismo, afirmar os direitos sexuais e reprodutivos e fortalecer a democracia. Celebramos a aprovação da Política Nacional de Cuidados, que passa a tratar o trabalho invisível das mulheres e o desenvolvimento. O trabalho invisível das mulheres como vetor da economia e do desenvolvimento. E compartilhamos que os dados em divulgação do Censo Demográfico de 2022 estarão subsidiando a elaboração das nossas políticas públicas. Reconhecemos os esforços dos múltiplos atores, os Estados-membros, a CEPAL, a UNFPA e especialmente da sociedade civil, com especial destaque ao movimento feminista e de mulheres na implantação do Consenso de Montevidéu. O Brasil seguirá atuando em parceria para que todas as pessoas, sem distinção, efetivamente constem nos processos de desenvolvimento. Muito obrigada.
La palabra República.
Dominican Republic.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to everyone. We would like to greet the members of each one of the delegations, representations from international agencies, members of the civil society present at this meeting. It is an honor to share with you the progress of the Dominican Republic in the implementation of the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development, convinced that this is an essential roadmap in order to promote the well-being, equity, and social inclusion. This international commitment, just like other commitments, is being integrated into the instruments of the national planning and public investment of the Dominican Republic. We are convinced that in order to make progress towards sustainable development, it is necessary to exhaust a process of national appropriation and articulation of all the development agendas. As a part of its implementation, aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and our National Development 2030 strategy, the country has advanced in a sustained way to generate information, to strengthen institutionality, and to implement public policies aimed at guaranteeing the rights of all persons. We can mention by way of progress that the rate of fertility in adolescents from 15 to 19 years old went from 61.77 to 31.18 per thousand women. This improvement is due or is thanks to interinstitutional policies, especially prevention of pregnancy in the adolescents. This was launched by the end of 2021. This policy is focused to eradicating noxious practices and guaranteeing access to sexual health services and reproductive health services, supported by sensitization workshops and training workshops to different populations. But also we have a legal framework that penalizes early unions. This confirms the commitment of the state with the comprehensive protection of childhood and adolescence. The country has strengthened the follow-up of population and development, creating a council for the Montevideo Consensus with a participatory approach, including the civil society, academia, and government organizations to monitor progress made. In this context, we have actively promoted the inclusion of persons with disability through the development policies like the expansion of the subsidized health insurance and the policy to create opportunities. Likewise, the generation of statistics reflect our commitment with inclusion. In the last household survey of the short module of the Washington Group to measure the population with disability. Intersectorial progress, we can mention the social inclusion and labor inclusion with sensitization campaigns for laboral inclusion, sensitization of the medical staff and specialized care for children in education, the implementation of the project towards inclusive education with 109 specific classrooms in regular schools, 60 special education centers, and care to more than 4,000 children in comprehensive care centers for disability. We can mention that we have initiatives to guarantee access to banking services, inclusive banking services, and we promote investment in inclusive tourism. I would also like to mention that since 2022, we have the intersectorial care panel as a recognition of the importance of this topic. Nationally, the Dominican Republic has joined the Cartagena group in its efforts and is working aligned with the mandate of promoting strategies for the integration and protection of human rights of persons with disability. These progresses reflect the vision of the country that moves towards a society that is more and more inclusive, equitable, and committed with the principles of the Montevideo Consensus and the 2030 Agenda for the National Development. So we ratify our commitment with the Montevideo Consensus. Thank you very much.
Agradecemos la intervención. Thank very much the statement of Dominican Republic, and we give the floor to the delegation from Uruguay.
Ahí, sí. Directiva.
Dear presiding officers, let me start with the necessary preamble. Since March 1st, 2025, a new government with a new political orientation is leading the country under the President Jamil. We members of the delegation participating in these presiding offices, we are members of the new cast of this government. In Uruguay, we cultivate and we work preserving Republican climate to avoid confrontation. Beyond what is specific for conceptual differences that have to be solved under democratic rules. We do not always meet the aspiration, but this government wants to cultivate and preserve this aspiration. This relates to a natural fact. Some population policies have evolved to a status of state policies. For instance, those linked to reproductive health. But there are changes that we are looking for and that we need to include in the orientation for different policy areas. Regarding institutionality, since 2010, there is the sectorial population that worked in the Secretary of Planning, an office that I am leading today, and a space for government and institution oriented. It worked in a continuous manner with a more or less activity. Part of this continuity line is regulated by this government that through a law that create a commission of expert in population policies with members of the education of finance, work, interior ministry, foreign affairs ministry, social development, public health, National Statistic Institute, the Office of Planning and Budget, and delegates from political parties are members of this office. So in Uruguay, we have a tradition and a vocation of making cross coordination institutional. Montevideo Consensus form parts of the guiding purposes of this commission as concerning health and reproductive and sexual right. Uruguay is a leader in guaranteeing health coverage to all the population. The new budget law that is under vote for the national programs has made an accent on health and infancy health, assigning 12% of the this expenditure. Our we protect the right to health based on human rights, that among the main points has the respect to the dignity of people, the right to participate in the decision of their own care treatment regarding child health. We focus on comprehensive health with a focus on prevention, promotion, and rehabilitation of child and youth health, reducing gaps in access and quality by implementing a sociosanitary network. There are some key programs. The pediatric live and a specific program for follow-up during pregnancy, the first week of life of babies. There are some examples of good practices. Since April this year, the Ministry of Public Health and the National Education Administration worked together, crossing information between information system of both institutions to identify the health status of more than 300 school children of the whole country. We were able to reduce 65% of the health card of children. 65% of children have their health card enforced. In March, we examined the Commission on Sexual and Reproductive Right, which was not, that was summoned by Dr. Rios here present. For our country, today, live a dignified life is also to be able to have a dignified death. This year, we have approved a law that legalizes and regulates euthanasia. We are the first country in the region going through the legal road. And migration, it's an emerging issue. We have formed the Reference Center for Migration, depending from the Social Development Ministry, which provides support and gathering space for migrant population, and in order to collect updated information on their rights to service. People can have access to documentation, social services, access to health, education, work, housing, training, among others. In addition, the state the UNICEF and the program for reestablishing family connection of the Red Cross that provides services also are members of this center. Regarding vulnerability for climate change, the National Statistic Institution has introduced two methodological. One is measuring income poverty. In May this year, update that will have been postponed for a long time. The housing 2025-2029 housing plan understand the access to adequate housing is an essential condition in order to exert other rights and move towards a more fair society. Guidelines include service to vulnerable households, provide adequate household, promote social household, and a comprehensive approach to access to the sites and housing. With the stress and innovate in policies that are able to promote quality cares throughout the life, particularly in considering gender gaps. The participation in infrastructure is key for a sustainable development, for territorial equity, to deepen the territorial reach scope. Or we have an agreement between the to moving towards specific programs to serve needs of the citizens in terms of territorial access. Regarding statistic information, we have an example of good practices today. The National Statistic Institute created a gender-specific unity to move towards information with gender perspective that will review improving the development of definition, classification, and method utilized to improve gender information. Regarding disability, the government presented a report on the situation of disability in Uruguay based on the most recent census, based in the institutionalization of public policy regarding disability. The initiative is part of the process for constructing the first plan for access and rights of persons with disability. Tomorrow, the Director of Disability of the Ministry of Social Development, Federico Lizama, will expand the information regarding this advancement. Finally, we are working for a substantial reform as to social protection, acknowledging in structural inequalities. We do this from the dialogue with all stakeholders involved with the decision that we need to reinforce our system for resource transfer and provision of care, with the conviction that public policy must ensure dignified welfare throughout the life in this century. It's extremely relevant that we want to consider to put to the consideration to the presiding officers that Uruguay may host the same conference in the year 2026. Thank you very much. We thank the intervention of Uruguay, and I want to read the list of Venezuela, Suriname, Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, and I want to ask the delegation to limit their intervention to 3 minutes. Otherwise, we will not be able to finish at 6 o'clock, and we need to end at 6 o'clock. Venezuela has the floor. Thank you very much to the presiding officers. My thanks to ECLAC and the Population Fund. My greeting to the delegations of members of multilateral agencies. Venezuela ratifies its willingness to continue to move towards the implementation of the Montevideo Consensus, which objectives has been incorporated to our development plan. This commitment, this pledge, we took the pledge in spite of the imposition of over 1,000 coercive measures from the part of the hegemonic powers, international powers, that we denounce here because they break international right and the chart of United Nations chart. They want to introduce a chaos in the social dynamic and provoke a real danger to human rights of our peoples. In this framework, we want to highlight the huge efforts that we have made to continue moving forward the production engines of the Bolivarian economic agenda based on endogenous development with social equity, oriented with linkages, based on new territorial spaces, starting from the abilities and the powers offered by the different functional sub-regions. Taking advantage of the demographic bonuses and incorporating the different sectors that traditionally were the most excluded sectors from the society. On the other part, the organized community are planning the specific action agendas, reinforcing the national system of social emission and a massive diversified system of transfers. All of this with the leveraging with a new territorial conception of the state and its public policies. Considering this, considering the agenda, we highlight the recent creation of this huge mission Venezuela women, Venezuela young people, grandfathers or grandparents of the mother and the plan to return to the motherland and sectorial plans oriented to the expression of different manifestation of poverty and social exclusion, but also the right of our people to development. Finally, we want to mention the recent enforcement of the new organic law for inclusion, equality, and social development for persons with disabilities, and the formulation and the action program for this sector, under which we have defined public policies to provide the service and active participation of our population with disability through the National System of Comprehensive Care towards persons with disability and the mission Jose Gregorio Hernandez. He was a Venezuelan doctor recently created saint by the Vatican. We thank Venezuela and I will give the floor to Suriname.
Thank you, Mrs. President. I want to take the time to congratulate the staff for putting such a great work for creating this document. We, the people of Suriname, want to speak our deepest sincere to all the countries that have been attacked by the Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean. We, the Republic of Suriname, reaffirms our commitment to the principles and objectives of the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development. Since the adoption of the census, we have made meaningful strides in strengthening its institutional framework and advancing key areas of population and development policy. Notable progress includes the ratification of international conventions that promote gender equality and protect vulnerable populations, such as Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities and several conventions on fair compensation, non-discrimination, and minimum age for employment. Suriname is at the moment collecting data for the population and housing census and household for surveys, and have also included questions about people with disability, which will help us making better policy for people with disability because the latest census was from 2012. Although through the time, Suriname has always making policy for people with disability. But with this new census data, it will give us a better view about people with disability. Despite these achievements, Suriname continues to face challenges that require sustained attention and collaborative effort. These include addressing disparities in access to service across urban and rural areas, ensuring the full implementation of gender-sensitive policies, and strengthening data system for monitoring and evaluation. The government recognizes the importance of multi-sectoral engagement and remains committed to fostering partnerships that support evidence-based policymaking and inclusive growth. Suriname expresses its gratitude to regional partners and international organizations for their continued support and look forward to deepening cooperation to fulfill the aspiration on the Montevideo Consensus for all citizens. Thank you.
Agradecemos a Surinam y le damos la palabra a Antigua y Barbuda.
Thank you. Madam Chair, distinguished colleagues, representatives of ECLAC, UNFPA, Government of Colombia, civil society, and fellow delegates. It's an honor for Antigua and Barbuda to address the sixth meeting with the presiding officers of the Regional Conference on Population and Development. We extend our appreciation to the government of Chile for hosting us, to ECLAC and UNFPA for their steadfast leadership, and to the government of Colombia for their partnership in advancing this agenda. Antigua and Barbuda speaks today with a deep sense of responsibility, not only to our people, but to the wider Caribbean and to all small island developing states whose voices must be heard in this forum. We welcome the presentation of the ECLAC document, Persons with Disabilities from Statistical Visibility to the Exercise of Rights, supported by UNFPA. This is a landmark contribution. For too long, persons with disabilities have been invisible in our data and therefore underserved in our policies. Antigua and Barbuda strongly supports the work of the open-ended Cartagena Group on the rights of persons with disabilities. We believe that statistical visibility must translate into tangible rights, accessible health services, inclusive education, decent work, and full participation in decision-making. We commit to strengthening disability disaggregated data collection, guided by the Washington Group short set, and to embedding accessibility standards in all sexual and reproductive health and rights services. We also call for regional cooperation to ensure that disability inclusion is not an afterthought, but the foundation of our population and development agenda. The Montevideo Consensus remains the most progressive and comprehensive framework for population development in our region. Antigua and Barbuda reaffirmed its full commitment to its implementation. We highlight three priorities where urgent action is needed: climate resilience and population dynamics. For Caribbean, small island developing states, climate change is an existential threat where stronger hurricanes are prevalent, as we are witnesses today. Over the last 3 days, watching our member state, Jamaica, our Caribbean brother and sister, suffer at the extraordinary wind strength to the most dangerous hurricane of all time. Melissa spared no effort to destroy Jamaica and now heads to another Caribbean island, Cuba, further damaging our small island developing states. We pray that the affected islands can bounce back to normalcy and that others will look to support as we have collectively done in the past. My Prime Minister has already indicated Antigua and Barbuda's readiness to assist as best as we can. Rising seas, the effects of these hurricanes and prolonged droughts disrupt health systems, livelihoods, and access to essential services. We urge these 6 national presiding officers to integrate climate resilience into every aspect of our population and development planning. Youth empowerment. Young people are not only the future, they are leaders of tomorrow. We call for the institutionalization of youth participation, including youth co-chairs, fellowships, and structured opportunities to shape our agenda. We also support the creation of a Caribbean youth climate, sexual and reproductive, and health and rights fund to back youth-led initiatives that link health, gender equality, and climate action. Inclusive, sexual and reproductive, and health and rights and gender equality. Affirm our commitment to universal access, including comprehensive sexuality education, maternal health, family planning, and prevention of gender-based violence. These services must be inclusive of persons with disabilities, accessible in design, and resilience in the face of climate shocks. Our areas of focus: population and development integration to national planning, youth empowerment and education, including addressing adolescent pregnancy, gender equality and gender-based violence prevention, aligned with sexual and reproductive and health and rights commitments, migration and demographic trends, recognizing the mobility of Caribbean populations, climate resilience, given the national threat climate change poses to small island developing states. We have hosted in 2023 a Caribbean Forum on Population and Development in collaboration with UNFPA and ECLAC, which shows our commitment to this cause. It addressed emerging issues such as demographic shifts, migration, adolescent pregnancy, and gender-based violence. Our challenges: limited resources and capacity for data collection and disaggregation, need for sustained financing to implement commitments at scale, ensuring continuity of services during climate shocks and disasters. Antigua and Barbuda has built a strong institutional framework, convened regional dialogue, and aligned national policies with the Montevideo Consensus. The leadership role in the Caribbean has positioned us to push forward on youth, sexual and reproductive and health and rights, gender equality, migration, climate resilience, while continuing to address resource and data challenges. We welcome the civil society declaration and recognize the indispensable role of civil society organizations, including youth networks and organizations of persons with disabilities, in advancing the Montevideo Consensus. Antigua and Barbuda calls for stronger regional solidarity and partnerships. Colleagues, the agenda before us is ambitious and it is urgent. The challenges are bold, inclusive, and forward-looking. Antigua and Barbuda stands ready to work with all of you to ensure that our region leads the world in linking population and development with climate justice, youth empowerment, and the full realization of sexual and reproductive and health and rights for all. Let us leave Santiago with renewed determination to transform commitments into action and action into lasting change for all peoples. Thank you.
Agradecemos a Antigua y Barbuda.
We thank Antigua and Barbuda. Now Barbados has the floor.
Distinguished delegates, representatives of member states. Barbados reaffirms its commitment to the promotion of the Montevideo protection and specifically to promoting and protecting the rights of persons with disabilities in alignment with international standards and principles. We recognize the importance of creating a society that is inclusive, equitable, and accessible to all. Today, I am pleased to highlight Barbados's recent initiatives aimed at advancing the rights of persons with disabilities. Our government has enacted a Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill, which has addressed the multiple and interrelated issues affecting persons with disabilities. This bill encompasses areas such as education, health, employment, rights to home and family life, and sexual and reproductive health. By grounding our approach in principles of equity and rights, we aim to mitigate the vulnerability of persons with disabilities in our society. Furthermore, Barbados is in the midst of implementing a life cycle approach to supporting persons with disabilities through the establishment of a social empowerment agency. This agency integrates key entities, including the National Disabilities Unit, the Welfare Department, the Child Care Board, and the Welfare and Assistance Board. By bringing these bodies together, we aim to reshape the delivery of social interventions, transforming outdated paradigms towards a more inclusive and empowering framework for persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups. In line with our disabilities policy, we are working towards a comprehensive set of legal protections for persons with disabilities, which include the expansion of grants for persons with disabilities in persons who live with Down syndrome, autism, multiple sclerosis, and severe cerebral palsy, to name a few. Additionally, Barbados is considering, or has recently considered rather, enhancements to its family leave legislation. We recently passed through our parliament an expansion of maternity leave, the introduction of paternity leave, and the expansion of special leave for persons who are caring for persons with disabilities. Our efforts are guided by the principles of inclusivity, equity, and social justice. We believe that persons with disabilities have the same rights and dignity as all citizens, and it is our responsibility to create environments that enable them to reach their full potential. We are committed to working with stakeholders, including civil society organizations, the private sector, and international partners to advance the rights of persons with disabilities. One of the key challenges we face is ensuring that our policies and programs remain data-driven and accessible to all. To address this, we remain committed to ongoing monitoring and evaluation of our initiatives with a focus on identifying areas for improvement and implementing evidence-based solutions. In addition, we recognize the importance of international cooperation and knowledge sharing, as well as in advancing the rights of persons with disabilities. We look forward to continuing our work with the international community, sharing our experiences and learning from others to promote a more inclusive and accessible world for all. In conclusion, Barbados is committed to promoting the rights of persons with disabilities and the dignity of all vulnerable persons. And we believe that the work that we have done in recent years seeks to advance the Montevideo Convention and ensure the greater protection of vulnerable groups across the spectrum. Honorable Chair, I thank you.
Agradecemos a
We thank Barbados and now recognize the UN Agency for Human Rights. Delegates and representatives of the civil society, good afternoon, everyone. From the UN Office for Refugees, I thank you for the opportunity to take part in this regional instance. We would like to highlight two key areas that we consider essential to move ahead towards more societies that are more inclusive, resilient and inclusive. And same as the report of activities of the Cartagena Group, we would like to highlight that the statistical visibility of persons with disabilities in the context of forced displacements continues to be an urgent challenge. The lack of desegregated data prevents recognizing the rights of these people, which is a double risk of being made invisible on account of the forced displacement and also their disability. We welcome the regional progress made as well, the soon adoption of the final document of the working group on forced displacement and population of the Statistical Conference of the Americas, as well as other good national practices in countries such as Honduras, Guatemala, and Peru, just to mention a few, because you have been truly generous sharing your good practices and developments achieved by participating countries. These efforts are essential in order to implement the recommendations of the group of experts on refugee statistics, internally displaced and persons without a nationality. This is a tool to ensure the rights and make sure that displaced people that have disabilities be considered in the policies, programs, and inclusive budgets as well. Second, that we must recognize the national progress made and implementation of the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development with a key roadmap for the population dynamics and sustainable development with a rights-based approach. Within this framework, it is essential that persons who are displaced by force, refugees, people who request asylums, and those internally displaced are fully integrated in the development frameworks. Effective inclusion of these population groups responds not only an ethical and legal imperative, but also strengthens social cohesion, resilience of the community, and the sustainability of development processes. And that is why, like NUR, we recognize our commitment to continue working within the framework of cooperation of the UN for sustainable development together with states, promoting synergies and between humanitarian action and development and contributing to the construction of more inclusive societies, resilient and equitable. That is the only way that we will be able to move towards development that leaves no one behind. Thank you.
Agradecemos.
We thank ACNUR and now recognize IMO. Thank you, Madam Chair. Your Excellency, distinguished delegates and representatives of the civil society, UN colleagues. Above all, we would like to express our congratulations to ECLAC and UNFPA for the organization of this important event, and thank you for the invitation to participate. And also my special greetings by our regional director, who was unable, unfortunately, to be with us today. I would like to begin by recalling that the Montevideo Consensus has adopted a human rights approach and recognizes that migrant and refugee persons must enjoy their rights without distinction of their migratory status, and also recognizes the contribution by migrant persons in their countries of origin as well as destination and their contribution to sustainable development of these countries. At the IMO, we do not tire of saying that safe, orderly, and regular migration, which is the slogan of our World Pact for Migration, does represent a driver for development for the societies of origin and welcome. And that is why IMO and other players of international cooperation have carried out studies in order to empirically measure the contribution made by migration to these receiving societies. In a study carried out by our organization together with a chamber of Venezuelan businessmen, contributes more than $2 billion through consumption and more than $2 billion through the payment of taxes in just 8 countries of the region. Furthermore, migration is also a fundamental aspect of the demographic growth of these countries that receive them. And Latin America has been experiencing, in a lot of countries, a growth in the fertility rate. In fact, Latin America is the region that has experienced the greatest drop in fertility for many years. The low birth rate and aging has led to a need for the productive markets to continue, and that there be people contributing socially. And here I'd like to put to you the example of Spain that has one of the population growth most important in Europe, thanks to the growth of migration and the children of these people. It is important to highlight that this country also has one of the most relevant sustainable growth of their GDP and relates to growth. This is related to their economically active population through orderly, safe, and regular migration. Furthermore, in terms of a disability that we've been talking about today, we invite governments to provide or to give special attention to the most vulnerable groups which are migrating and are requesting asylum. Among these, as you well know, there are many people with disabilities. As a rule, they have an additional barrier to access essential services, as mentioned by my colleague just now. Despite the efforts made by the receiving countries and countries of transit in attending to these people, migratory reality in many cases prevents them from accessing health systems. And it is very important that all receiving states and of transit may provide access to these health systems, also for education, social protection, and so on, regardless of their migratory status. And that is why that today we welcome the presentation of the document, Persons with Disability, and from Statistical Visibility and to the Development of Rights. Before ending, I would merely like to recall that the Montevideo Consensus insists on the need for international cooperation among countries of origin, transit, and destination to address the structural causes of irregular migration, creating safe channels and ensuring the protection of human rights for migrants, and especially the most vulnerable people. And it is because of this that we immensely grateful for this space for regional dialogue, because it's the key instrument to make visible with information and reliable data regarding the need to continue paying special attention to the most vulnerable persons among these migrants, sometimes with disabilities, in order to ensure a full integration and that they may in this way contribute to their country of origin as well as destination. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And so we thank the IMO, and for today we have ended our work. We remind you that we will meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m. in the same room. Have a nice evening.